Welcome back to Gambling Flow, your daily dose of all things gambling.
Glad to be back.
I'm Russell King.
I'm Fiona Blake.
We're ready for another deep dive into the world of strategy and odds.
And today,
We're going to be talking about poker.
the age-old question.
Online.
Online versus live.
Is one easier?
It's not really about easier or harder. It's about different
Okay.
skill sets, different paces, and ultimately what kind of poker experience you're looking for.
Something that's always intrigued me is you hear these stories of online grinders that crushed live games at like way higher stakes.
Right.
Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, so there's definitely some truth to that.
Okay.
Think about it this way.
Yeah.
Online poker has made it so easy to find games at any stake level.
Okay.
You can start with literally pennies online.
Right.
And so that attracts a lot of casual players who are just there for fun, especially at the lower stakes.
Yep.
But in a live casino, you're often looking at a $102 no-limit hold'em game as the lowest you can go,
Right.
which means the buy-in is already $200.
Yeah.
So that filters out a lot of the casual players who might only want to risk $20 or $40.
Okay.
So someone comfortable playing a $1, $2 game online might find themselves up against much weaker opponents in a live $1, $2 game simply because the barrier to entry is higher.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not that live players are inherently worse, it's just the stakes kind of filter out
Exactly.
the weaker players.
Now, this doesn't mean you can just waltz into a casino and clean up.
Right.
Live poker has its own unique challenges.
Okay.
For one, the pace is dramatically slower.
Yeah, it's way slower.
You're looking at maybe 30 to 40 hands per hour compared to hundreds of hands per hour online.
Yeah, and you hear those online grinders talking about multi-tabling where they're playing like 8 games at once.
Oh, yeah.
Is that even possible live?
You can't really do that live.
Okay.
Live poker is much more of a deliberate experience.
Okay.
You have the dealer shuffling and dealing physically,
Right.
players taking their time to think,
Yeah.
maybe even chatting a bit between hands.
Right. Yeah.
It's a very different vibe.
But that slower pace also brings in something that you don't have online.
Yeah.
Tells.
Ah, yes, the legendary poker face.
Yeah.
Live poker is all about observation.
Okay.
You're not just looking at your cards, you're looking at your opponents.
Okay.
Are they fidgeting, sweating, staring intently at the pot?
Yeah.
These physical cues,
Right.
whether conscious or unconscious, can give you valuable information about the strength of their hand.
I've always heard those stories about players who can tell if someone's bluffing just by the way they handle their chips.
Right.
Is that a real thing or is that mostly myth?
I think there's a lot of mythology surrounding tells,
Okay.
and it's easy to get carried away.
Right.
But experienced players will tell you that tells can definitely provide an edge,
Okay.
especially against less experienced opponents. It's not about looking for one specific gesture.
Right.
It's about noticing patterns in behavior
Okay.
and how they deviate from a player's baseline.
I see.
For example, if someone who's been talking a lot suddenly goes silent when they have a strong hand,
Okay.
that could be a tell.
All right.
Or if a player who usually bets confidently hesitates before putting in a big bet, that might indicate weakness.
So it's more about like reading the person and not just like having a list of tells from a book.
Precisely.
Okay.
And the longer you play with someone, the better you'll get at picking up on their individual tells.
Okay.
This adds a whole psychological layer to live poker that you just don't get online.
Yeah.
It's like a game within the game.
Now, another thing that's always intrigued me is live games tend to have more players in each hand.
Right.
Why is that?
So think about it this way online. If you have a weak hand, you can fold and instantly be dealt a new hand at another table.
Yeah.
But in a live game, you're physically sitting at that table. And sometimes boredom can lead players to stay in hands they would have folded online.
Yeah.
This leads to more multi-way pots,
Right.
which means you might have 4 or 5 players still in the hand on the river.
Yeah, that must change the strategy quite a bit from like the heads up or 3-way pots that you'd see more online.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You have to be much more cautious with your betting in multi-way pots.
Okay.
You might be up against a player who's drawing to a straight or a flush.
Yeah.
And with more players in the hand, the odds of someone hitting their draw increase significantly. It's
Oh.
a completely different dynamic.
Okay.
You can't just bet big and expect everyone to fold like you might be able to online.
Yeah.
You have to factor in all the possible hands your opponents could be holding and adjust your strategy accordingly.
So it's a lot more about reading people and understanding like the nuances of the game.
Absolutely.
It's not just like numbers and following a strategy.
It's a great way to put it. Live poker rewards players who are adaptable, observant, and can think on their feet.
Now, on the flip side, I've heard that live poker offers more flexibility when it comes to bet sizing.
Okay.
Online, everyone seems so obsessed with making the perfect mathematically calculated bet.
Yeah.
Is that less of a factor live?
Definitely.
Okay.
Live players tend to focus more on the strength of their own hands and less on analyzing your precise bet sizing.
Right.
This gives you more freedom to be creative with your bets.
Okay.
You can make a larger pre-flop raise to try and thin the field,
Yeah.
or you can use a small bet on the flop to trap an opponent.
So you're not as limited by these rigid betting patterns that you see a lot online.
Exactly.
You can really use bet sizing to your advantage.
Exactly. And that ties into another crucial aspect of live poker, table image.
Okay.
Online, you're just a screen name.
Right.
But in a live game, you're a real person with a history.
Yeah.
And that history influences how your opponents perceive your actions. If you've been playing tight all night, suddenly throwing out a big bet will have much more impact than if you've been raising every hand.
Right.
It's almost like you're building a persona at the table.
Right.
A reputation that you can then use to your advantage.
You can build this image of being a very loose, aggressive player and then use that
Exactly.
to get paid off when you actually have a really strong hand.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
You can build a table image of being a loose, aggressive player.
Yeah.
And then use that to get paid off when you actually have a monster hand.
Yeah.
Or you can play tight and patient,
Yeah.
waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike.
It's so interesting how much more psychology and strategy comes into play live
Absolutely.
compared to online.
Yeah.
But I think we need to shift gears and talk about money now.
Okay, let's do it.
After all, poker's about winning money.
At the end of the day,
Right.
it is a game about winning money.
But I've heard conflicting things.
Right.
Some people say live poker is more profitable.
Yeah.
Some people say online. What's the real story there?
Well, as with most things in poker, it's not that simple.
Okay.
Live games do tend to be softer, which means you might have a higher win rate in terms of big blinds per 100 hands played.
Okay.
But
There's always a but, right?
there is.
Yeah.
And in this case, the big but is the pace of the game.
Right.
Remember, you're only playing 30 or 40 hands per hour live.
Yeah.
Compared to hundreds online.
Yeah.
So even if you're winning more per hand in a live game, you're playing significantly fewer hands overall.
So it's not just about how much you win per hand, it's about how much you can win per hour.
Precisely.
Okay.
A skilled online player might have a lower win rate per 100 hands, but still make more money per hour than a live player because they're playing so many more hands.
So it really comes down to your individual playing style.
Yes.
And how you value your time.
Absolutely.
But there's another factor we got to think about when it comes to profitability, right?
Right.
The rake.
Ah, yes, the house takes from each pot.
Yeah.
And this is one area where online poker generally has a significant advantage.
Sure.
Live poker often has a higher rake, especially at lower stakes.
Right.
You might be paying $5 or even $6 per hand in rake in a live $1-2 game,
Right.
while online the rake might be capped at $3 or $4.
And then there's that uncapped rake that some of those live games have.
Oh, yeah.
Where they just take a percentage no matter how big the pot gets.
Yeah, you really got to watch out for that. It
Yeah.
can really eat into your winnings.
So when you're comparing profitability, you got to factor in the rake and the number of hands per hour.
Absolutely.
It sounds like there's a lot to think about.
There is.
It's not as simple as saying one's better than the other.
There are pros and cons to both online and live poker.
Right.
Ultimately, the best format for you depends on your personality, your goals, and how you value your time.
But before we go any further, I think it's time for a quick break.
Sounds good to me.
We'll be right back to dive even deeper into the nuances of online versus live poker.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to Gambling Flow.
So before the break, we were talking about how live poker offers more flexibility in bet sizing.
Right.
You mentioned that live players aren't as focused on those perfectly calculated bets. Why is that?
It really comes down to the information that's available.
Okay.
Online, you have software tracking every bet, every raise, every pot size.
Yeah.
You can analyze your opponent's tendencies down to the penny.
Right.
But in a live setting, you're relying on your memory,
Okay.
your observation skills.
Right.
Players might remember that you tend to bet big when you have a strong hand,
Okay.
but they're not going to remember the exact amount you bet each time.
So it's less about the numbers and more about the impression you're giving off.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of table image becomes so powerful in live poker.
Okay.
It's about cultivating a persona
Oh,
that influences how your opponents react to your bets.
I see.
Let's say you've been playing conservatively all night,
Okay.
only betting when you have a premium hand.
Oh,
Suddenly you throw out a massive bet on the river.
yeah.
What do you think your opponents are going to assume?
Well, if you've been playing tight all night, they got to think you finally hit that monster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're much more likely to fold,
Right.
even if they have a decent hand themselves.
Yep.
Because your table image suggests that you wouldn't be making such a big bet without the goods.
Right, yeah.
On the other hand, if you have a reputation for being a loose, aggressive player,
Okay.
you might be able to get away with bluffing more often.
Yeah.
Because your opponents will be hesitant to call your bets, fearing you might actually have a strong hand.
So it's almost like you're playing this mind game.
It's one of the things that makes live poker so much more dynamic and engaging than online play.
Okay.
You're not just clicking buttons and staring at a screen. You're reading people,
Right.
adapting to the flow of the game,
Yeah.
and using your table image as a weapon.
So table image, that's like a key skill that any live player needs to develop.
Absolutely. It's
Well,
not something you can learn overnight,
Right.
but as you gain experience and play in more live games, you'll start to develop a feel for how to create the image you want
Okay.
and use it to your advantage.
So we talked about like the psychological aspect of live poker.
Right.
What about the physical side of things?
Okay.
Like being in a casino, does that present any unique challenges compared to just sitting at home on your computer?
Oh, it definitely does.
Okay.
First and foremost, you have to be comfortable being around people.
Okay.
Live poker is a social game.
Yeah.
And you'll be interacting with players from all walks of life.
Right.
Some will be friendly and chatty, while others might be more serious and focused.
Mm-hmm.
You might encounter players who try to distract you,
Okay.
get under your skin, or even intentionally give off false tells.
Right. So you need a certain level of mental toughness
Exactly.
to play live.
You need to be able to focus on your own game,
Okay.
make rational decisions,
Right.
and not let the emotions of the moment cloud your judgment.
Yeah.
It's also important to be aware of your surroundings and pay attention to the nonverbal cues of the players at your table.
Are there any other like aspects of the casino environment that people should be aware of?
One thing that often catches new live players off guard is the sheer noise and activity in a casino.
Oh, yeah.
You've got slot machines ringing,
Right.
people cheering,
Yeah.
music playing,
Yeah.
and general chatter all around you.
Yeah. It can be overwhelming.
It can be overwhelming,
Yeah.
especially if you're used to the quiet solitude of playing online.
So you need like a certain level of sensory tolerance to play live.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's not just the noise.
Yeah.
There are also the flashing lights, the
Yeah.
constant movement of people,
Yeah.
and sometimes even the smell of cigarette smoke.
Right. Right.
It's a very stimulating environment,
Okay.
and it can be draining,
Yeah.
especially if you're playing for long hours.
Yeah. It's a whole different experience.
It is.
Compared to online.
And for some players, that's part of the appeal.
Okay.
They enjoy the energy and the excitement of the casino atmosphere.
Right.
It adds to the thrill of the game.
Okay.
But for others, it can be a distraction.
Right.
If you're easily overwhelmed by sensory input,
Yeah.
you might find it challenging to focus and play your best game in a live casino.
So it's important to know yourself.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And if you're not sure whether you'd prefer online or live poker, the best way to find out is to try both.
That's good advice. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Mm.
We've talked about the differences in skill sets and strategy.
Right.
What about the actual learning process?
Okay.
Is it easier to learn poker online or live?
That's an interesting question,
Yeah.
and one that doesn't have a straightforward answer. Both formats have their advantages and disadvantages when it comes to learning the ropes.
So let's start with online.
Okay.
What are some of the benefits of learning online?
Well, first and foremost, online poker offers unparalleled accessibility.
Okay.
You can play anytime, anywhere,
Yeah.
for any stakes you're comfortable with. You
Uh-huh.
don't have to travel to a casino,
Yeah.
dress up, or worry about getting a seat at a table.
Right.
You can just fire up your computer or phone and start playing.
That's a huge plus for someone starting out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And online poker also offers a wealth of resources for learning the game.
Okay.
You have access to countless articles, videos, forums, and even coaching websites that can teach you everything from the basic rules to advanced strategies.
Right.
You can also find software programs that can analyze your hands and help you identify leaks in your game.
So you have all this information
Precisely.
at your fingertips.
And because online poker is so fast-paced, you get to see a much larger volume of hands in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
This can help you learn the game more quickly and develop your instincts.
Right.
You're also less likely to be exploited by experienced players online
Okay.
because you can easily find games against opponents of similar skill level.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what about live poker?
Okay.
What are some of the advantages of learning in a live setting?
Well, as we discussed earlier, live poker offers a completely different dimension to the game.
Okay.
You're not just playing against cards.
Yeah.
You're playing against people.
Right.
You have to learn how to read their body language.
Yeah.
Decipher their betting patterns.
Right.
And develop a feel for the flow of the game.
It's much more interactive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while online poker can teach you the technical aspects of the game,
Okay.
live poker forces you to develop your social skills and your poker intuition.
I see.
You also get to experience the thrill of playing for real chips,
Okay.
the camaraderie of being at a poker table, and the satisfaction of making a big bluff or pulling off a well-timed read.
So there are these intangible benefits that you just don't get online.
Precisely.
Okay.
And while online poker can be a great way to learn the fundamentals of the game, there's no substitute for the experience of playing against real people in a live setting.
So both online and live kind of have their own learning curves.
They do. Okay.
And ultimately, the best way to learn poker is to combine both formats.
Okay.
Start with online poker to get a grasp of the basic rules and strategies, and then transition to live poker to develop your reading skills and your table presence.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
It is.
So combine the two.
And remember, poker is a game of constant learning and improvement.
Okay.
No matter how much you play, there's always something new to discover.
Right.
A new strategy to master.
Yeah.
A new opponent to outwit.
That's what makes it so fun.
Exactly.
I think it's time for another quick break.
Sounds good to me. We'll be right back to wrap things up and share some final thoughts on this epic battle between online and live poker. Welcome back to Gambling Flow.
We've been comparing online versus live poker.
Yeah, and it seems like both have their advantages and disadvantages.
Exactly.
It depends on the player.
It does. There's no one right answer.
Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one thing we haven't really talked about.
Okay.
The social aspect of poker.
Right. That is a big difference between the two.
Yeah. Online, you might have thousands of people on the site,
Mm-hmm.
but you're really just staring at a screen.
Right.
Live, you're face-to-face with real people,
Yeah, exactly.
sharing the experience.
Live poker gives you a chance to talk,
Yeah.
to joke around. You
Yeah.
can get to know the other players,
Right.
figure out their quirks.
Yeah.
It just makes it more fun.
Yeah, and especially in those long sessions, you kind of develop a camaraderie.
Oh, yeah.
You're all in it together.
You're all sharing the highs and lows,
Yeah.
the bad beats and the big wins.
It's something you just don't get online.
You're right.
You might chat in the chat box,
Right.
but it's not the same.
Not even close. For a lot of players, that's what makes poker so fun.
Right.
It's more than just trying to win money.
Now, I know some online players might say, no, I like that there's no social interaction.
Right.
You can just focus on the game.
They don't have to deal with those distractions. They
Yeah.
don't have to worry about being intimidated or anything like that.
So it's kind of a trade-off, right?
It is.
Online's more convenient,
But live, you get that social interaction.
so it comes down to what you're looking for.
Exactly.
And the best way to decide is to try both.
Get out there,
Yeah.
play some hands,
Mhm.
see what you enjoy more.
Well, I think that about wraps up this deep dive into online versus live poker.
It's been fun.
Any final thoughts?
Just remember that poker's a fun game.
Go, guy.
Online or live.
Yeah.
It's challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It's rewarding.
Yeah.
Just go in with a good attitude. And remember that there's always some luck involved.
That's a good point. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to Gambling Flow. I'm Russell Kane.
I'm Fiona Blake.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.